Hello and welcome to another Wellness Way USA radio show. I'm here with Lori Newcomer and Dr. Robert Corvino of Array Strength. Welcome, Robert, joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
How are we today?
We're here.
It's a little early compared to most of our podcasts, but I think we can get through it. Today, Robert would like to speak about, IBS, right?
Yeah, today we're about some of the more practical things that you can do just kind of right away to help improve some of your IBS symptoms.
What are some examples of IBS or a brief description?
Yeah, so IBS is essentially a gastrointestinal condition. It is considered to be non-inflammatory, but what it is it's actually defined by a group of symptoms. So symptoms being things like nausea, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, even chronic fatigue, headaches, stuff like that.
Okay.
So out of your client base, how many people are affected by IBS?
I would say that IBS is typically the condition I work the most with. The reason being is that gastrointestinal disorders are really common nowadays. They've actually been a little bit more common today than they were about 20 years ago. And there's a bunch of different theories behind why they're more prevalent, but what we found is that, as time goes on, it seems like more and more people are being diagnosed.
Is it due to diet and just the way things are made now?
There's definitely a dietary component. A lot of things that we believe comes back to some of the modifications that have been made with food and even the westernized diet. So the way that we eat nowadays is significantly different than the way that we used to eat. And there's a lot more refined carbs, refined grains, refined sugar in our diets. There's a lot more fried foods, saturated fats, trans fats. And with the addition of these types of nutrients in our diet, we've seen a lot more changes in the expression of disease.
So you say it's different than it used to be. We know there's some differences in the food supply and how they make the food, the most common food that we get. Is it attributed to anything else, maybe such as stress?
Yeah, absolutely. So, diet is a really big portion, but there are many other things that really do play a role in the expression of irritable bowel syndrome, stress being a very big one. So there's a link between your brain and your gut. It's called your gut-brain axis. But your GI tract is actually controlled by a nerve called your vagus nerve. This nerve is a parasympathetic nerve. So your autonomic nervous system is comprised of two parts: your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight and flight, and your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. So when the body is chronically stressed, you're in this sympathetic state, and your body doesn't have that natural ability to rest and digest. So controlling stress is a huge thing when it comes to controlling symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome.
Do you feel like most people stress eat now just because they don't have another choice? Our lifestyle?
Yeah, stress eating has definitely increased. I think that comes with kind of the increased, I guess there's a lot more running around. We try to do everything a lot faster. We pack things into our days. We eat on the go, right? There's fast food. We're always trying to hurry up. We're always trying to pack everything into our day. And when we do that, we're always in that stressful state. So the food that we are eating isn't being digested like it should be because we're not in a state of rest.
What are some suggestions you would have for people to, kind of relieve that stress, not turning to stress eating, but also to kind of diminish some stress?
Stress is mostly a factor of anxiety or worrying or, trying to do too much. So a couple really good ways to moderate stress. The first one would be something, simply like yoga or meditation. The reason that these things work so well is because diaphragmatic breathing is a really big portion of meditation and yoga. Diaphragmatic breathing is essentially breathing through your belly instead of breathing with your chest. So most people actually, if you watch them breathe, they'll breathe with their shoulders. But really what you should be doing is, if you put your hands on your stomach, you should be breathing into your stomach. And what that does is that really activates your diaphragm. the easiest way to turn on the vagus nerve that I was talking about, which controls your rest and digest, is through diaphragmatic breathing. So when you diaphragmatic breathe, you're actually turning on that system and you're helping your body digest food easier.
Great.
So could I ask maybe the difference between how your body breathes in those two scenarios? So chest breathing versus the diaphragmatic breathing. What's the major difference of how your body accomplishes those breaths? That's a question I had. Well, your diaphragm obviously works in both circumstances, but what changes? How do you breathe differently when you chest breathe?
Yeah, that's a good question. It actually is very biomechanical. So going more into chiropractic, when you look at someone's gait, people can walk, in a way that isn't functionally optimal. So when they're walking poorly, it's just a function of them having poor biomechanics. Same thing with breathing. The correct biomechanics for breathing is to breathe into your stomach. It's to breathe diaphragmatically. But what happens is through poor posture and poor biomechanics throughout life, your body starts to change from this optimal style of breathing with your shoulders. So now you start to have tight traps. Breathing with your chest, you start to have tight neck flexors. And what this does is this not only changes your posture, but it actually affects a lot more than that.
Do you feel that do you think that women maybe out of all your clients have this problem more than men? And I ask that based on, a little bit, they maybe don't want to stick that belly out when they're breathing, because we all think about it a little bit. If our belly distends too far, we have a little self-conscious about it, but maybe women are a little more self-conscious, so they'd be the ones that don't want to breathe with those belly breaths. Is that what you find?
I haven't found, either gender having more of an issue, but that is definitely an issue. When I teach people about belly breathing, that is one thing that they're concerned about, is sticking out their stomach. Because really when you breathe correctly, you are pushing out your stomach, right? You're losing that tone. But it is so beneficial physiologically. Not only is it de-stressing you, but it's taking the tightness out of your back, out of your neck. So if you suffer from these neck pains, these shoulder pains, a lot of times when you start breathing better, you're going to see those pain go away.
So you can see the ones with the bigger guts have the less GI issues. Is that what we're saying here?
Well, you think about children, infants that when you see them, they're just taken out of the womb, you see their belly is very pronounced, and you're like, wow, you would figure they'd have a six-pack,
Mm-hmm.
but they're breathing and their belly sticks out far, and it's just something you think about. You're like, wow, so it does change. And maybe those tight belts that we wear, or some people wear, may inhibit you belly breathing too. So clothing could be a way that maybe makes you breathe wrong. Maybe these super stretchy spandex, neoprene uniforms that the women wear now, it may inhibit those breaths.
What are some other things we can do other than wear sweatsuits everywhere and belly breathe? I mean, are there some other options?
Yeah, so going back to things like yoga, meditation. So meditation is going to be really good, not only because you're diaphragmatic breathing, but because you're really clearing your mind. So when I talk to people, I really want them doing something at least once a day where they're de-stressing themselves. I don't really care what that thing is, but what I usually recommend is that most people are going to be very, very stressed from the time that work starts to lunch. So I usually recommend around lunchtime to take at least 15 minutes of your break and literally just breathe, try to not think about much.
Kind of unload.
Unload, absolutely. And the reason for this is because typically if you use your lunch break to just eat and either continue working, or maybe you do something, an errand, you do something, quick that you need to get done.
Still stress.
Exactly. You're still stressed. So now you start that second half of the day with not relaxing at all, not resting at all during lunch, which it's a break for a reason, right? And you start that second half of the day as stressed as you were when you started that break. And then you're going to go through the rest of the day. When you finally get home, it's finally your time to relax.
So I've been waiting to ask this question since you and I have fortunately been able to talk about IBS quite a bit. Do you feel like it's better for someone that's stressed not to eat than it would be for them to try and maybe calm down? If they couldn't calm down, you say maybe it's better if you don't eat?
You know, that's a really hard question to answer. And I think the reason for that is because when it comes to IBS, the most important thing is going to be finding the foods that they need specifically to be eating. When someone is stressed, they are putting a big load on their body. So first and foremost, I would tell them or recommend, try to de-stress yourself before you eat. Now, if they can't achieve that, you know, that's very difficult to say. Typically, when I work with people, we can achieve that. And because we can achieve that, that's not an issue that I've ran into. So I don't really have a good recommendation as to going
Yeah, I just
forward.
think about people that have, high stress jobs that can't really take a break.
Mm-hmm.
They may be, truck drivers, or they may be like working on equipment that they can't leave, or they may be in, meetings all day where, you pretty much have to bring. I used to work in a newsroom. You don't get a break, and there's always stress, and you don't get time to eat. So, that's where those questions come from, is like the practicality of this is sometimes difficult.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a newsroom, it's hard to de-stress ever, much less de-stress in a time period that you're going to be able to eat.
Now, when I work with, patients who have those high stress type jobs, what I'll typically do is I won't, if I know that I can't achieve, getting them to take a break, or if I can't achieve getting them to meditate, do things like that, then I'll start to focus on things like sleep. So sleep is going to be huge, because if you're sleeping well, it gives your body the ability to regenerate and rest, so that when you wake up, realistically, our bodies are supposed to be able to handle the stressors of the day. So even if we're stressed, we really shouldn't be necessarily needing a nap. We shouldn't necessarily need a bunch of coffee, right? Our bodies should rest during the night, and when they wake up, we should have optimal levels of energy. So typically, if I'm working with someone who doesn't have the ability to do these things, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to essentially optimize their circadian rhythm by getting them to sleep absolutely amazing. And then maybe get them taking some things like adaptogenic herbs, which essentially...
Say what?
So adaptogenic herbs are going to be herbs that help your body naturally adapt to stressful situations.
Examples?
So a really good example would be something like ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is an herb that what it does is it regulates your sympathetic nervous system. So even if you're extremely stressed throughout the day, what it helps you do is it helps you decrease your sympathetic input to the point that your body can enter that rest and digest state and handle that daily stress a lot easier.
Supplement only, or can you find it in food?
That would be a difficult food to find. It is an herb, so you can always find an herb fresh, but that would be more of a supplement.
Yeah, we've had a few pods on supplements, and you are pro supplements. Which ones would you recommend would be best for IBS patients?
So when it comes to IBS, the first and foremost thing I'm going to do is it's really important with regards to essentials. So essentials are always going to be really important with regards to diet, lifestyle, and then there's a couple essentials that are really important, being a good multivitamin. So one of the biggest things when it comes to any condition is making sure that that condition is not being driven by any nutrient deficiency. The way that we farm our food nowadays is because it's been so commercialized, we've depleted a lot of our soil of vitamins and minerals. So the foods that we're eating today just aren't the same as what our grandparents and our great-grandparents used to eat. Same thing with the addition of all of the genetic changes that we've done. We're not eating that same high quality vitamin and mineral dense food. So getting a good high quality multivitamin is going to help avoid any nutrient deficiencies. That would definitely be one. The second thing would be a good high quality omega-3. Omega-3 is going to be something that's very anti-inflammatory, and because of the way that the westernized diet has been, a lot of times when patients have IBS, it's going to be due to some sort of origin of inflammation, and that inflammation is what is causing those symptoms. So decreasing inflammation as much as possible through an omega-3, really, really beneficial.
Omega-3, the source usually is from fish?
Yeah, typically fish.
Mercury concerns. I read a lot about. How do you feel? And I know you and we talk about this a lot. The supplements you recommend are really high quality, clinically dosed. Many people don't use those because of affordability. So what's your take on that? Is the mercury a concern?
Mercury is absolutely a concern. It's the biggest concern, like you just said, in a lower quality type supplement. So when you're working with these higher quality, therapeutically dosed supplements, you're not going to have as much of a concern. Now, it may still be a minimal issue that can be, worked on through some sort of detoxification for heavy metals. But at the end of the day, if you're taking a really high quality supplement, that's not something that you should be super concerned with.
Is there an indicator of heavy metal poisoning that people could pick up on their own? Or is that something you have to go to a lab for?
That would be something that would be, easier done diagnostically. When it comes to heavy metals can actually drive a combination of diseases. So there are going to be, some specific signs of heavy metals, but most of the time when you have a heavy metal type poisoning, there's going to be multiple different expressions of a condition. So you could see diabetes, you could see IBS, you could see autoimmunity. A lot of different things can be driven because heavy metals are going to play a really big role in essentially just changing your physiology.
Now you have on one of the topics you have today an importance of the essentials. What do you mean by that?
When it comes to working with IBS, what I've found is that now I've known a lot of people with IBS all my life, and I've known them to try pretty much everything, right? They try a probiotic, they try glutamine, they try colostrum, they try all of these really, really well-known supplements for working with IBS. But unfortunately, they don't see a lot of good results. And what I wanted to explain is that this supplement specifically, it's not the fault of the supplement that the supplement didn't work. But in fact, when it comes to working with IBS in most gut conditions, the essentials are going to be the most important thing. When I say the essentials, what I'm talking about is diet, lifestyle, and then essential supplementation. So the essentials is going to be the combination of making sure that you're eating right for you, making sure that you're living right, thinking right, de-stressing yourself, and getting those high quality levels of nutrition through a multivitamin, a fish oil, and then any vitamins and minerals that through diagnostic testing that we find you're limited in.
And your next bullet point here is diet. So elimination diet, more specifically. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, one of the easiest ways for someone who's suffering with IBS to begin to identify the foods that are troublesome for them to eat.
And what do you mean by troublesome?
A lot of people who have IBS will have specific foods, and they'll know this when they're listening, that specifically bother or cause flare-ups of symptoms, right? They might cause nausea, they might cause bloating, they might cause diarrhea or constipation. And when they eat those foods, they recognize this. So most of the time, when I sit down with an IBS patient, I can ask them, what are your trigger foods? So those trigger foods, we want to identify those. Now, you don't need a medical professional to help you identify these foods, and that's what an elimination diet does. An elimination diet is a very easy way to, over a period of time, identify the foods that are specifically triggers for your condition.
But to do it on your own is a very strict process.
It is a very strict process.
And from what I understand of the common community around me, most of those people would have trouble with that.
No, you do have a shortcut, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So what we do in my clinic is we recommend a panel which is testing for sensitivities. So rather than having to do an extensive elimination diet, which takes typically about 2 months, we will do a panel that is going to run 96 of the most common allergenic foods, and we'll be able to see specifically what you're responding to.
And that's just a simple blood draw.
And that's versus
Now that's
eating that 100% whole food or reading every label.
absolutely.
Right?
And
And keeping a journal.
Now
That's a long
now the
process.
nice thing about the elimination diet, though, is I do want to give it some credit. Is it's as strict as it might be, there are a lot of people that are really in need. And when they're really in need, they will do the work.
Go outside of their normal
You know,
behavior.
they will go outside because what they're searching for is they're searching for the answer. So I do want to give some credit to the elimination diet because it's very, as strict as it might be, you know, it is a well worth process for 2 months to take some time to learn what is causing flare-ups essentially of your symptoms.
And now I know you've said before, sometimes your favorite foods are the problem. Could you tell us about that? That seems to be something I never heard before. You opened it up for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is actually a little bit of a weird situation, but you're typically addicted and intolerant to the foods that you're the most sensitive to.
You crave those foods.
Yes, you absolutely crave those foods. One of the reasons that you crave those foods is because the way that your immune system works is when your body is intolerant to something, typically that's going to be a protein. Now, the reason that our body tags proteins is because proteins is going to be the same structure as typical pathogen. So when it tags a protein, your immune system is going to take, every time that you eat that food, it's going to take that protein and it's going to ball it up, right? It's collecting it. And the reason it's collecting it is because it's easier to handle something that has been collected into one spot that as compared to essentially something that's floating around everywhere.
Kind of like herding cats or something.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly, like herding.
You're talking about within the bloodstream this happens, or within an organ? Where does this happen?
I can't say exactly where this is happening. This is most likely happening, somewhere within the digestion process. And when it balls up, whatever you're tagging as inflammatory, it's easier to deal with. And that's why your body will do that. Now, what happens is when you stop eating that food and your body wants to break it down, your body will begin to break down those large molecules that they've made of essentially, like Lori said, that herded protein. And when they start to be released from that large molecule, you'll actually see a flare-up. So it's really interesting because when people detox, a lot of the reasons that they're going to see these detoxification reactions, one of the reasons why people will say it gets worse before it gets better is because when you actually stop eating something, what you were eating for a long period of time that has been balled up will begin to break down. And now that it's essentially increased in your bloodstream, you're going to have way increased symptoms. And then, after a couple weeks, you'll start to see those symptoms regress and you'll feel much better, but you will have that initial, essentially, flare up.
Like a ramp up of symptoms that you may have been having, maybe get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does this happen with people? Are these same things stored in fat? So when people go through a diet that they eliminate fat, then those fat cells are processed, and so are the toxins. Is that a similar? Because I've read about things like that. Does that happen? Is that true?
That's a little different. Typically, your body will store excess toxins and fat, but that's a little bit different. That's actually coming from the liver. That's not as much as your body is tagging it as a pathogen, right? So there's a difference between a toxin, which would be any type of metabolic waste, and something that your body's actually tagging as dangerous.
Okay.
So how are they connected, or what are some key things to avoid?
With regards to
most common proteins to avoid the
Yeah, because everybody's body's different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're talking about IBS, Martha's mentioned spinach.
Yeah.
I guess cooked spinach she doesn't like, but raw's okay, and then we have different things.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, I love spinach. Anyway, so we can have some of the same symptoms, but to different things. So what are the biggest one is going to be gluten.
There's been a lot of talk about gluten for a long time, but one of the reasons that gluten is actually such a big allergen nowadays is because the modifications that we've made to our grains has actually caused for our grains to have about double the gluten that it used to have. And they've done some research, and what they've found is that gluten, as a protein from wheat and a couple other grains, it has been found to cause some sort of inflammation in actually every single individual. So in one research study, what they found was they took gluten-containing foods and they fed it to a multitude of individuals, and they actually found an inflammatory response in every single individual. And with regards to IBS, getting gluten out of the diet is going to be huge, because getting inflammation as low as possible is going to be one of the biggest and easiest ways to decrease the symptoms that the patient is having.
So does gluten affect your flora?
Does gluten affect the flora? Gluten does not, I wouldn't say it directly affects the flora, but what it's doing is it directly affects inflammation.
And what is flora?
Flora is going to be the bacteria that is colonized within the gut.
And what does affect that bacteria?
So the biggest thing that's going to affect your flora, now the biggest thing that will affect increases in pathogenic or unhealthy bacteria is going to be the presence of sugar. So all of what it's called would be dysbiotic bacteria. It actually feeds upon sugar, and it feeds upon refined carbs. So the more sugar and the more refined carbs that are in the diet, the more you're actually going to increase the presence of this dysbiotic bacteria.
How much sugar is okay?
How much sugar is okay?
You knew I was going to ask it, didn't you?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, because that's going to be
I know what you want to say.
Completely individualized.
Yeah.
For every single individual.
Do you eat sugar?
Sugar is actually...
Do you eat refined carbs?
I do not eat refined carbs.
I do know he eats bread, though, the sub bread.
I do like really good sourdough bread. Now, sourdough is going to be a little bit different. Sourdough actually is really, really low in gluten. It's not refined, and it's actually a probiotic food, so it's actually fermented. It has some natural levels of probiotics.
So as far as bread goes, sourdough is better than like those 8-grain or multi-grain breads. Everything else, sourdough is the only bread, basically.
Sourdough is going to be the best bread. The reason for that is if you're finding a really good ancient grain source, the reason I say ancient grain is because it's going back to what we just spoke about with not having the same grains that we used to have. So finding an ancient grain sourdough bread, you're going to have significantly less gluten. Now, during the fermentation process, that's actually helps to degrade the gluten content. So you're going to have really, really low gluten levels in sourdough. You're going to have really, really high levels of bacteria, healthy bacteria. And it's actually been shown to be a lower glycemic food, which means that it's not going to spike your blood sugar.
Even lower than whole grain?
Yes.
Wow.
So what are...
all the things you read.
Yeah, everything
not
you think
always
whole
correct,
grain
are they?
or wheat.
Now whole grain it's not bad, but it comes back to the ancient grain. Where are the grains that the baker is baking the bread coming from?
The whole grain movement was glycemic, hit. It's trying to lower that glycemic hit.
Yeah.
That's what most people, I mean myself, understood it as. So you want to eat, if you're going to have to eat bread, you want to eat one that's got a lower glycemic index, so it doesn't promote that pre-diabetic type evolution.
But sourdough it tastes so normal. Like I've made sandwiches for the kids out of it, and they can't tell.
Now, whole grain bread is going to be a much better option than white bread. So the level of carbs when it comes to kind of the ladder of healthiness, it's going to be white grains, right? So white bread, white rice, white pasta. The next level is going to be things like brown breads, right? So whole grain breads, brown breads. Next level on top of that is going to be your ancient grain type breads.
But you're always looking at additives, right? Because most of the bread, even the stuff that I eat, I looked at the label the other day just looking for, okay, what are they doing to assemble this bread? Mm-hmm. How do they make it? It's full of all kind of other stuff,
Yeah, that's definitely something that you always want to pay attention to, is what's in the bread. And that's why, when it comes to an ancient grain bread, you're really only looking for a couple ingredients. Now, I'm not a baker, so I can't tell you exactly what's in the bread, but
it should be simple
it
things
shouldn't be like
salt,
30
flour,
to 50 ingredients.
flour,
Yeah.
sugar, maybe
Yes.
in some of them, water, and nothing much above those.
Now, pasta. Is there a gluten-free pasta?
There is gluten-free pasta. I've never had it personally.
Do you have to? Does it say gluten-free?
Yeah.
And you have to buy
Is it
gluten-free pasta.
What about the spinach pasta?
So the spinach pasta is actually
Like regular pasta with spinach added, usually?
that's pretty much all it is. And so pasta is made from semolina. Semolina is just another grain, right? So it all comes back to, is that grain refined or is that grain whole? And that's really what we're looking for.
You've got to do your research when you're picking out these products.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not easy to eat well.
Now, do each food, I guess the digestive system or timeline, that transit time,
The old transit time.
all the, I guess, foods fluctuate for everybody? Is that right? Or is there some that you digest quicker, or that's standard?
Yeah, so all foods are going to be digested at a different rate based on their structure, right? Their molecular structure is going to be what causes how long it takes to digest a specific food. Now, specifically for people individually, they should have a transit time with regards to, you know, when you eat to when you use the restroom between about 12 and 24 hours. Any shorter than that, and what's actually being shown is that your body is tagging something as an allergen. So it's trying to flush it out as quickly as possible. If you eat something and right away you have to run to the restroom, your body tagged something as dangerous. So what your body's doing is it's protecting you by getting it out as fast as possible.
I always wondered about that, you know,
Wow.
because it happens pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like even within the meal you're eating, you might have to get up, which is to me was bizarre because you think there's no way that could happen that fast.
Yeah, that's your body's natural defense mechanism.
Where does it begin to pick up that it's, you know, being tagged? Where does it start tagging?
I can't give you an exact location. I would say that it's most likely somewhere in the beginning of the small intestine. Your body's natural immunity is very, very smart, right? We don't really give credit to our natural immunity like we should, but 80% of your natural immunity is actually within your gut. And the reason for that is because it's the first place that your body actually encounters the external environment. When we eat, that's all coming from the external environment. So that small intestine, you have, you know, you're going to have that external environment in the stomach, but your small intestine is where it actually begins to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So your body really is paying attention. What are we allowing into the body? And that's why we have 80% of our immunity in that area.
So your small intestine kind of thinks about food. It's like, hey, we don't like this, or yeah, this is good.
Yeah, our immune system is very, very smart. And that's why it's so important that we're supporting our body's natural immunity through our nutrients, through the foods that we eat, even optimizing our flora. So sugar feeds bad flora. What feeds good flora is going to be things like prebiotic fiber. So that's why, you know, when your mom told you to eat your fiber, it was actually really important. So eating high quality vegetables, green leafy vegetables, eating whole grain foods, getting high levels of fiber is going to be really important because you're feeding that beneficial bacteria. Now that beneficial bacteria is going to do a couple things, but some of the major things that it does is it actually produces metabolites that help to strengthen the gut wall and the gut lining. And the gut lining is that first place that allows things to cross into the bloodstream. So the stronger that gut lining is, the less that shouldn't be crossing into the bloodstream crosses over.
So vegetables. Eat more vegetables.
Eat more vegetables.
Okay.
Eat more vegetables, eat more fiber.
Especially your green leafies, because your green leafies are going to be, so back to that ladder of carbs, right? We have our refined, then we have our brown breads, we have our ancient grains. When we get up towards the top, we're going to have our whole grains, which would be things like our brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat. And then the top is going to be our green leafy vegetables because they are the most nutrient-dense carbohydrate source that we can have.
Good to know.
Yeah, it seems to always go back to the green leaves.
It always goes back to the green. Popeye knew what he was doing.
Yeah,
There you go.
you know, and hey, what a great influence over us when we were younger, right? But so we've covered IBS quite a bit. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to add?
No, I think that we covered it pretty well. The major thing with IBS that I like to address every time that we talk is it comes back to hope. And it always works with the essentials. You know, a lot of people, and I've known a lot of people with IBS, and they think that they've tried everything. And I understand, you know, because I watched a lot of people go through this. But the major thing when it comes to IBS is really focus on the essentials. Typically, when I get patients doing the essentials really well, eating a diet, avoiding their triggers, de-stressing themselves, right? Not eating on the go, diaphragmatic breathing, meditating daily, getting them sleeping really well. Then on top of that, doing their optimal multivitamins daily, getting in the nutrients that they know that they're deficient in, right? Maybe getting their blood drawn, seeing if they're low in vitamin D, supplementing vitamin D, getting some omega-3s for anti-inflammation. When people do the essentials really well, typically between 80 to 90 of their symptoms will resolve.
That's pretty good. And, you know, there's many people, maybe people that are members of our group at Wellness Way USA or your patients that have benefited from listening to you or engaging in your practice. We appreciate it because you kind of came in and, you know, you kind of flipped everything on its head. We were going in a direction that we were finding a lot of the stuff, but there was nobody that really knew it all. And I really think this is going to be the forefront of medicine in the future. I think this is really the front line of getting us healthy and maybe lowering our health costs for everyone in the country. So we all need to be on board to a certain extent with this, and it will help. I believe it will help everyone.
Absolutely.
So if you want to find Dr. Robert Corvino, you can check out Array Strength, and his office is currently in Pensacola. Do you want to give out a phone number or an email?
Yeah, our office line is 850-466-2302, and our email is very simple. It's just arraystrength@gmail.com.
So if you're having any of these issues or any other issues that you think maybe Dr. Corvino could help you with, just feel free to give him an email or a call, and he'd be glad to talk with you and consult with, you know, maybe some options for you. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time with another Wellness Way USA radio show. Thank you.